Whether service tax is applicable on reimbursement of expenses. Service taxes on reimbursement of expenses is governed by Section 67 and Rule 5 of Service Tax Rules 2006. Section 67 defines consideration as, consideration includes any amount that is payable for the taxable services provided or to be provided, any reimbursable expenditure or cost incurred by the service provider and charged, in the course of providing or agreeing to provide a taxable service, except in such circumstances, and subject to such conditions, as may be prescribed. Any amount retained by the lottery distributor or selling agent from gross sale amount of lottery ticket in addition to the fee or commission, if any, or, as the case may be, the discount received, that is to say, the difference in the face value of lottery ticket and the price at which the distributor or selling agent gets such ticket. It is clear from the above that reimbursable expenditure is also included in total value of consideration. However, one has to refer Rule 5 of Service Tax Rules. Rule 5 Inclusion in or exclusion from value of certain expenditure or costs. Where any expenditure or costs are incurred by the service provider in the course of providing taxable service, all such expenditure or costs shall be treated as consideration for the taxable service provided or to be provided and shall be included in the value for the purpose of charging service tax on the said service. Explanation. For the removal of doubts, it is hereby clarified that for 3. The value of the telecommunication service shall be the gross amount paid by the person to whom telecommunication service is actually provided. Subject to the provisions of sub-rule, the expenditure or costs incurred by the service provider as a pure agent of the recipient of service, shall be excluded from the value of the taxable service if all the following conditions are satisfied, namely: the service provider acts as a pure agent of the recipient of service when he makes payment to third party for the goods or services procured. The recipient of service receives and uses the goods or services so procured by the service provider in his capacity as pure agent of the recipient of service. The recipient of service is liable to make payment to the third party. The recipient of service authorizes the service provider to make payment on his behalf. The recipient of service knows that the goods and services for which payment has been made by the service provider shall be provided by the third party. The payment made by the service provider on behalf of the recipient of service has been separately indicated in the invoice issued by the service provider to the recipient of service. The service provider recovers from the recipient of service only such amount as has been paid by him to the third party, and the goods or services procured by the service provider from the third party as a pure agent of the recipient of service are in addition to the services he provides on his own account. Explanation 1. For the purposes of sub-rule, pure agent means a person who enters into a contractual agreement with the recipient of service to act as his pure agent to incur expenditure or costs in the course of providing taxable service. Neither intends to hold nor holds any title to the goods or services so procured or provided as pure agent of the recipient of service. Does not use such goods or services so procured, and receives only the actual amount incurred to procure such goods or services. Explanation 2. For the removal of doubts, it is clarified that the value of the taxable service is the total amount of consideration consisting of all components of the taxable service, and it is immaterial that the details of individual components of the total consideration is indicated separately in the invoice. Examples where reimbursement expenditure is taxable. Illustration 1. X contracts with Y, a real estate agent, to sell his house, and thereupon Y gives an advertisement in television. Y billed X including charges for television advertisement and paid service tax on the total consideration billed. In such a case, consideration for the service provided is what X pays to Y. Y does not act as an agent behalf of X when obtaining the television advertisement, even if the cost of television advertisement is mentioned separately in the invoice issued by X. Advertising service is an input service for the estate agent in order to enable or facilitate him to perform his services as an estate agent. Illustration 2. In the course of providing a taxable service, a service provider incurs costs such as traveling expenses, postage, telephone, etc., and may indicate these items separately on the invoice issued to the recipient of service. In such a case, the service provider is not acting as an agent of the recipient of service but procures such inputs or input service on his own account for providing the taxable service. Such expenses do not become reimbursable expenditure merely because they are indicated separately in the invoice issued by the service provider to the recipient of service. Illustration 3. A contracts with B, an architect, for building a house. During the course of providing the taxable service, B incurs expenses such as telephone charges, air travel tickets, hotel accommodation, etc., to enable him to effectively perform the provision of services to A. In such a case, in whatever form B recovers such expenditure from A, whether as a separately itemized expense or as part of an inclusive overall fee, service tax is payable on the total amount charged by B. Value of the taxable service for charging service tax is what A pays to B. Illustration 4. Company X provides a taxable service of rent-a-car by providing chauffeur-driven cars for overseas visitors. The chauffeur is given a lump sum amount to cover his food and overnight accommodation and any other incidental expenses such as parking fees by the Company X during the tour. At the end of the tour, the chauffeur returns the balance of the amount with a statement of his expenses and the relevant bills. Company X charges these amounts from the recipients of service. The cost incurred by the chauffeur and billed to the recipient of service constitutes part of gross amount charged for the provision of services by the Company X. Source: Service Tax Rules 2006.